What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Primetime Sports Podcast, hosted by Joey May Larry. So today is the NFL Draft. Just recorded a great episode earlier today with my good friend Spencer Bono. We talked everything about the NFL Draft, from our favorite prospects all the way to a first-round mock draft, all 32 picks we did with no trades involved, since usually when you do trades, it gets to be a little bit messy at times. Guessing wrong about which team's going to trade up and which team's going to trade down. So what we did was he drafted all of the odd number picks and I drafted all the even number picks, which was awesome. So definitely go check that out. In this episode I'm doing right now, I'm going to give my final mock draft, one that I did over the weekend, and I liked some of the picks and where I had some guys going. And now when I look back, I wasn't really too happy with where I had everybody going, but I'm not going to change it. This will be the mock draft that I make as my final prediction. And then also I'll talk about the LA Clippers and how they played in Game 2 in Denver very briefly, because I just want to give some praise and some love to Kawhi Leonard after how great he played in that game on Monday night. He was absolutely terrific. You can't ask any player to play as well as Kawhi played in that game, put the team completely on his back, and just stepped up in a big time game. So credit to Kawhi. I'll talk about him at the end of the episode. So let's start out with my mock draft. And I did do some trades in this one, just because I feel like there's always going to be trades. It's just tough to guess where trades are going to be and who's going to trade down and for what player. But I did include some trades. So start off with the first overall pick, Tennessee Titans taking Cam Ward. Best quarterback, I think, in this year's draft. If the Giants had the opportunity to draft him at number 3, I would love to see the Giants take him, but obviously it seems like it's a definite that he ends up going number 1 to Tennessee, and they get their quarterback of the future after missing out a few years ago when they took Will Levis. At number 2, we have Travis Hunter going to the Cleveland Browns. I think this would be a good landing spot for him. They just did lock up Myles Garrett on a long-term extension, so Abdul Carter I don't think necessarily would be the best pick here. Hunter makes a lot of sense on both sides of the ball. They could use a receiver, and they also could use a cornerback. So depending on what they prefer, obviously they might have him more probably as a wide receiver, I think, maybe in that offense rather than a corner, because they do have Denzel Ward and have some good defensive backs. But he could fit in on either side of the ball in Cleveland. And they're in a rebuild, so they could really test him out on either side of the ball to start out. And then if he struggles on one side, put him on the other side, or vice versa, obviously just to try to make ends meet. At number 3, I have the New York Giants taking Abdul Carter, an edge rusher out of Penn State. Really good disruptor out of the backfield, has a great first step, and obviously was a big-time player at Penn State. I wasn't necessarily a big-time fan of him during the college football season. I felt like he was getting a lot of hype since he went to Penn State and had a similar build to Micah Parsons, so I feel like everyone was just saying he's the next Micah Parsons. But then I watched a little bit more film on him, and especially considering where the Giants are at, I think it makes a lot of sense to take him. I think if you get rid of Kayvon Thibodeau, which is definitely a possibility, you end up needing another edge rusher, and having him with Brian Burns could be a great pass rusher duo, especially with Dexter Lawrence in the middle of the defensive line. We'd love to see either Hunter or Carter as a Giant. Those are the two guys I want there at number 3. Then at number 4, I have the Jets trading up the New England Patriots, and I have them taking Shedeur Sanders, quarterback out of Colorado. I know Shedeur is getting a lot of buzz about him falling potentially in the first round and going into the 20s and maybe even the 25th or 30th overall pick. I still think he ends up being a high draft pick. I think every single year right before the draft, you see a lot of smoke screens and a lot of headlines coming out about certain players, with teams hoping that a guy's going to fall to them in the draft, or maybe it makes it easier for them to trade up. So I know that always happens. There's always going to be smoke screens. I don't really buy into Shedeur falling out into the middle 20s as a draft pick right now. I know I saw some mocks, just a few final ones that had him going in the late 20s. I think he ends up going still top 5 to top 10. Not necessarily because I think he's a top 5 player in this year's draft. I don't think so. And as I said, I don't want him to be on the Giants. I wouldn't take him at number 3. But I think when you look at Shedeur and you look at the quarterback position is just so important, and that's why you see a lot of teams overdraft and they overvalue the quarterback position when it comes to the draft, where if you need a quarterback, you just draft it for need and not necessarily because it's a really good value pick or because you necessarily think he's the answer. Sometimes people just draft quarterbacks just because they're the quarterback that was highly regarded and the one that's there, so they take them. I don't necessarily always buy into that formula. I don't think that necessarily always works. I think if you take a quarterback, it has to be the guy you think is the answer. You don't just take a project quarterback that you don't think is necessarily the answer in the top 10. So that's why I don't really buy into Tyler Shuck being a first-round pick or even Jalen Milroe. I think both those guys are probably more of a project. I think even Jackson Dart to some degree would probably probably sit out for a little bit. I don't know if he's necessarily a day one starter in the NFL, even though I do like him a lot. And the same thing goes for Shedeur Sanders. I don't think he's necessarily a day one home run, hitting quarterback right away. I don't know if any of these guys in this year's draft are home run hitting quarterbacks right away. I think Cam Ward probably has the highest potential of all of these guys. I'm the biggest fan of him, and then probably Jackson Dot at number 2. So as I mentioned, I think Shedeur still ends up going in the top 5. So I have him going to the New York Jets here at number 4, with the Patriots trading down after they miss out on Carter and Hunter. Then at number 5, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars taking defensive lineman Mason Graham out of Michigan. I think they definitely want to shore up that defense. I think Mason Graham would be a really good pick here. I do think they could also go offensive line to try to help out Trevor Lawrence, but they end up going defense here, I think. And as I mentioned today in the podcast earlier, defensive line and offensive line is how you win in today's game. I don't think you take a quarterback just because, especially when you can take a blue chip prospect potentially in the offensive line and defensive line, and you're rather than swinging at a quarterback that you're really just throwing a dot at, not knowing if they're going to be good or not. I think it's better to take a guy that could potentially be a home run hitting prospect that's a defensive lineman or an offensive lineman, since you really do win the game in the trenches. And then whenever the time comes where the quarterback of your future potentially is there and available, you go out and you get them, because now you have the offensive line and the defensive line to try to go out and win games and obviously support the quarterback on the offensive side, giving him time to throw. As I mentioned with Jacksonville, I could definitely see them going offensive line here. You need to support Trevor Lawrence and give him more time to throw. I know the turnovers were an issue last year, but I still believe in Trevor Lawrence and believe he can be a top quarterback in the NFL. At number 6, I have the Raiders taking Will Johnson, a cornerback out of Michigan. At number 7, I have the Patriots taking Will Campbell, an offensive tackle out of LSU. I think the Patriots are in a position right now to take the best player available. If Carter and Hunter aren't there at number 4, I could see them potentially trading down and getting Will Campbell, who they maybe could take at number 4, but they can now trade down and get him at number 7 and maybe add a draft pick as well. Especially when you're in a rebuild, if you can add more potential draft picks and add more depth pieces and more potential draft picks that could be starters on your team, within the first 3 rounds, usually those guys are starters right away, and even sometimes in the 4th round. I think that definitely makes a lot of sense there for the Patriots. And I think offensive line is definitely a need. You need to help out Drake May, keep him upright and keep him healthy. I know there are some people that are not really too big of fans of Will Campbell, but I think he could be a good player there for the Patriots. I definitely think it's worth a risk, at least at the end of the day. You're going to miss on offensive tackles. You're going to miss on draft picks all of the time. But if there's a prospect that you're high on that you could potentially think, could be a bookend guy for you, either on the left side or the right side, it's always worth the gamble, even if it doesn't end up working out. So I think at number 7 here for the Patriots, it would make a lot of sense here to take Will Campbell. At number 8, I have an edge rusher out of Georgia, Jalen Walker, going to the Carolina Panthers. Obviously, after trading Brian Burns last year, pass rush is a need for them, so maybe they could go out and get Jalen Walker. At number 9, I have the Dallas Cowboys trading up and getting Ashton Jeanty, running back out of Boise State at number 9. They're trading up here with the New Orleans Saints. As I mentioned today in the podcast earlier, they've always wanted, a star running back over the last year or so, and they have still been looking for that and haven't really necessarily got their answer. So I think Jeanty ends up being the guy they go out and get. As I mentioned, I don't know if that's necessarily the smart decision for them. I think if you're going out and you're getting a running back, that's a luxury position that you should probably only add if everything else is set up. The quarterback, the offensive line, the defensive line, even the secondary. If you have a lot of things that are set up to succeed and win football games, adding a luxury piece like a running back can make sense. I don't think the Cowboys are in that position, but I could definitely see them taking Jeanty anyways. At number 10, I have Kelvin Banks, an offensive tackle out of Texas, going to the Bears. It makes a lot of sense here for the Bears to shore up that offensive line. At number 11, I have another offensive lineman going, and that's Armand Membo, a offensive tackle out of Missouri, going to the San Francisco 49ers. Offensive line is definitely a need for them, especially considering Trent Williams is getting older. Could definitely see them taking a lineman here. At number 12, I have the Saints taking Jihad Campbell, a linebacker out of Alabama, who I mentioned a lot earlier today with Spencer. I know Spencer's a big-time fan of him, and he definitely showed me a lot of his film and pointed out a lot of things in Campbell's game that stand out. So I definitely think it could make a lot of sense here for the Saints to take him, considering a lot of their linebackers like Demario Davis and a lot of players on the defensive line like Cameron Jordan are getting older. At number 13, I have the Dolphins taking Shamar Stewart, an edge rusher out of Texas A&M. Don't really love this pick. Now when I look back at this mock draft that I made over the weekend, I don't really love Shamar Stewart going here 13th overall. I definitely could see him falling. I know a lot of people are high on him because of his build, and he's a big, sized player and a big prospect. But when you look at his stats, he only had 1.5 sacks last year. I know the potential might be there, but I think it's definitely a risk there if you're taking him at 13. Miami does need help on the defensive line, though, considering some guys have gotten hurt over the last few years, like Jalen Phillips, like Bradley Chubb. So I could definitely see them going out and getting an edge. At number 14, I have the Colts taking Tyler Warren, a tight end out of Penn State, who somehow fell in this mock draft. I think they'd be very happy going out and getting a playmaker like Warren. At number 15, I have the Falcons taking Teteroa McMillan, a wide receiver out of Arizona. I know they took a wide receiver a few years ago early on in Drake London. They also took Kyle Pitts at one point in the top part of the NFL draft, and the same goes to Bijan Robinson and Michael Penix last year. They seem to always take offensive weapons early on in the draft. In the first round, it seems to always be an offensive player, whether it's a skill player like Pitts, London, or Bijan Robinson, or a quarterback like Penix. I could see them going out and getting a wide receiver here. At number 16, I have Michael Williams, an edge rusher out of Georgia, going to the Arizona Cardinals. I think they're in an interesting position. They could go offensive line here, defensive line, maybe even secondary, but I think they go out and get an edge rusher here. At number 17, I have a defensive lineman out of Oregon, and that's Derek Harmon, going to the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals could go in a variety of ways here with this pick. I could definitely see defensive line, could see an edge rusher if they maybe get rid of Trey Hendrickson, could see them going offensive line. But in this mock draft, I had them taking a defensive tackle, which is definitely a need for them. We'll see, what they end up doing tonight. At number 18, I have the Chargers trading up, and I have them taking Matthew Golden, a wide receiver out of Texas. They'd be trading up in this mock draft with the Seattle Seahawks. Wide receiver is definitely a need for them. I know last year they did pretty well getting Ladd McConkey, but they still need another wide receiver to try to help out Justin Herbert. So Golden could make a lot of sense here, and he put up some good numbers at Texas this season. And then I have another Texas player going at number 19, and that is Jahdae Barron, a cornerback out of Texas. I have the Green Bay Packers actually trading up and getting him here with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I have them trading up and getting a corner because I think that's definitely a need for them. Jair Alexander struggled with some injuries, so I could see them going out and getting another corner, especially in that division where you have to play some really good receivers. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. It could make sense for them to go out and get another corner. At number 20, I have the Denver Broncos taking Amarion Hampton, a running back out of North Carolina. Had a really good year last year on their offense. Bo Nix surprised a lot of people. I could definitely see them going wide receiver here potentially, or offensive line. I think they can go in a variety of ways as well, but I think they end up taking Amarion Hampton to try to add an explosive player to their offense. At number 21, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers taking Mike Green, an edge rusher out of Marshall. I know there's a lot of ways they could go with this pick as well. They're still waiting on a quarterback, so maybe they could take Jackson Dart here, or Shedeur Sanders if he somehow falls. Maybe they could potentially trade up, but I haven't taken Mike Green out of Marshall. At number 22, I have the Seahawks taking an interior offensive lineman, and that is a guard in Tyler Booker out of Alabama. He could definitely start on their offensive line day one. That's a team that has had an interesting offseason, obviously moving on from Geno Smith in a trade with the Raiders, but then they bring in Sam Darnold, also bring in Cooper Kupp. I think they could potentially try to add to the offensive line to try to help out Sam Darnold and give him some time to throw. At number 23, I have Kenneth Grant, a defensive lineman out of Michigan, going to the Tampa Bay Bucks. At number 24, I have defensive lineman Walton Nolan out of Mississippi, going to the Minnesota Vikings. At number 25, I have Josh Simmons, a tackle out of Ohio State, going to the Texans. At number 26, I have the LA Rams taking Colston Loveland, which is an interesting pick here considering, where they're at right now. They did move on from Cooper Kupp, so now wide receiver is potentially in need. Even secondary could be in need. Defensive line, they could go in a variety of ways as well, which I've said now about a good amount of teams. They could all go in multiple directions, which is the beauty of the draft. You never know how things are going to shake out. At number 27, I have Malachi Starks, a safety out of Georgia, going to the Ravens. Seems like they always like to draft defensive players early. At number 28, I have the Detroit Lions taking Donovan Ezeraku, an edge rusher out of Boston College. I see Ezeraku still being a first-round pick. Obviously you never know where a guy's going to end up going in the draft, but I could definitely see him going to Detroit considering they need help on their defensive line and as an edge. Donovan Ezeraku would definitely help out their pass rush. He could be a really good player for them. And he's a guy that obviously works very hard, had a very good year this past year for BC, and is a good leader. I think he could be good for them in their locker room. At number 29, I have the Washington Commanders taking an edge rusher and James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee. Washington could go in a lot of directions as well. They had a really good season last year. They could just take best player available. with this pick, and Pierce could end up being that guy. At number 30, I have the Bills taking Maxwell Hairston, a cornerback out of Kentucky. I think cornerback makes a lot of sense here for them. I could see them double dipping and taking a wide receiver in the first round for the second year in a row, but I think cornerback makes sense considering they've had a lot of changes in their secondary over the last year or so. At number 31, I have Ariante Ursary out of Minnesota, an offensive tackle going to the Chiefs. Like I mentioned earlier, offensive line is still in need for the Kansas City Chiefs, and Ursary is a guy that could go in the first round, could go in the second round, could even go in the beginning of third round. It's really hard to project where he's going to go. But just based off of size and potential, I think the Chiefs could definitely take a swing here and take him at 31. Then at number 32, I have the Philadelphia Eagles rounding out the first round and taking Shavon Revel Jr., a cornerback out of East Carolina. And that would mark 2 years in a row where they take a cornerback in the first round, which would be really interesting. But considering they moved on from Darius Slay this offseason and James Bradbury obviously is up there in age, and I believe is a free agent. I know they added Adoree Jackson this offseason, but I still see cornerback as a need for them, so I could see them going out and taking Revel Jr. here with the 32nd overall pick. So that's my final mock draft. Hopefully, I get a couple picks right, but at the end of the day, that's the beauty of the NFL draft. You never know who's going to go where and what team's going to trade up and shake things up. I think the beauty of the NFL draft is also how it brings everyone together. A lot of my coworkers and I were talking today about the NFL draft, and then even a lot of people I haven't heard from in a long time, I talk sports with over text. They're all reaching out to me, we're talking about the draft and who we want to see the Giants take, who we want to see the Patriots take. It's a really beautiful thing in the NFL draft, how it brings people together. So hopefully everybody enjoys it. Best of luck to everybody's team in that regard. And then really quick, I just want to talk about the Clippers, who had a big-time win on Monday night against the Denver Nuggets. Huge win, 105-102. Kawhi Leonard was ridiculous in this game. Kawhi had 39 points, 3 rebounds, 5 assists, a block, 2 steals, of a 15-19 shooting, and 4 of 7 from 3. 3 of his 4 misses were in three-pointers, which is very, very impressive. He had a very great game. It seemed like every time he went up to take a shot, he was hitting it, and he was getting contested a lot, was getting obviously pushed and shoved. It felt like every single possession. The Denver Nuggets were playing aggressive defense on him. We're all over him, and he was still hitting some big-time shots, even sometimes in double coverage as well, with 2 guys on him. He was always scoring somehow, some way. Kawhi was just absolutely ridiculous in that game. He's averaging 30.5 points per game in this series, 2.5 steals as well. He has just been absolutely awesome to watch. And I think a major storyline in Game 1, obviously, was the turnovers of the Clippers, where they had 20 turnovers allowed, and the Nuggets only had 11 turnovers. And then you look at Game 2, it's a complete opposite. The Clippers had 11 turnovers, Denver had 20 turnovers, and that ends up being a major difference in that game. Jokic did struggle with turnovers. Nikola Jokic had 7 turnovers in that game in Game 2, while Kawhi Leonard in Game 1 had 7 turnovers. So you completely flip-flop, the two team superstars and their turnovers, and then the team's total turnovers overall, and then you end up seeing who wins that game. Obviously, the Denver Nuggets won Game 1, Clippers won Game 2, and this was a game where Ivica Zubac played very well, Kawhi Leonard was great, Harden had a couple really good moments as well, but at the end of the day, they didn't really get enough from some of their other guys. Derrick Jones Jr. had 6 points, but was just 3 of 7 from the floor. Nick Batum's honestly been playing really well in this series, especially on the defensive end. He always does a little thing or two that definitely adds up to a win at the end of the day. He did have a block and 2 steals. Bogdanovich has struggled in this series. He was over 5 in that game. And then you also look at it as well. Norman Powell was 5 of 14 with 13 points. But Powell did really step up in the fourth quarter and hit a couple big-time shots in some big-time moments. Zubac was awesome, 16 points, 12 rebounds, 4 assists. As for Denver, Jokic did have a triple-double, 26 points with 12 rebounds and 10 assists and 3 steals. But the 7 turnovers were a major issue, and he's also 6 of 10 at the free throw line, which was definitely a little bit lucky for the Clippers that he was missing a good amount of free throws in that game. Michael Porter Jr. was just ridiculous on the offensive glass, and overall on the glass, he had 15 points and 15 rebounds. The Clippers definitely have to try to slow him down tonight. We'll see how things go for the Clippers. If Kawhi Leonard plays the way he did, Tyronn Lue is absolutely right with what he said after Game 2. If Kawhi Leonard is healthy, they can win any series. That's just a reality. You saw that on Monday night. He was just absolutely awesome on both ends of the floor. He is 10 of 10 in this series when guarded by Jamal Murray, so that's a complete mismatch. And he's 24 of 34 overall in the series. And if you look at it, on the defensive end, he has been locking guys up. The Nuggets are shooting just 4 of 21 when guarded by Kawhi in this series. So he's shooting 24 of 34 on the offensive end and then holding his opponents to 4 of 21 on the defensive end. So very, very impressive numbers there. And this is an impressive stat that I saw from NBA University on Twitter. Since his final playoff run in San Antonio in 2017, he's played in 66 games. And in those games, has averaged 29 points while having a total shot percentage or total shooting percentage of 64% just about. 8.4 rebounds per game, 4.4 assists per game, just under 2 steals per game with a plus 286 plus minus. Every single average there is higher than his regular season averages during this time, and obviously is one of the best playoff performers of all time. That's, as I said, a tweet there from NBA University, which just proves how electric and how much Kawhi Leonard steps up to the occasion when he gets to the playoffs. He's a terrific player in the regular season when he's healthy, but when you see Kawhi Leonard dominate like he did on Monday night, it's just a special thing to watch. A lot of the shots he was taking were just big-time shots at big-time moments against really good coverage. So credit to Kawhi. He's been awesome. He got obviously a lot of criticism, at the beginning of the season when he was injured. A lot of people saying he should retire, but he really just silenced the noise and just stuck to his game and stayed true to himself and stayed true to the process. And obviously now you see why the Clippers rested Kawhi a lot during the regular season so he can play his best basketball in the playoffs. And obviously we're watching that right now. So the game plan for the Clippers tonight is obviously to do what they did in Game 2, where they try to limit the turnovers and obviously try to force a lot of turnovers on the defensive end. But they also need some better shot making out of Norman Powell and Bogdanovic. Those are two secondary scorers on the team. Obviously, their main scorers are Kawhi Leonard and James Harden and Ivica Zubac. But Powell can go for 20 any given night. And the same thing with Bogdanovic. He can go for 15 any given night. But those two guys, Bogdanovic and Powell, have to step up. When Kawhi Leonard's on the bench and James Harden's on the bench and they're getting their rest, they need those two guys to step up. They need to see better minutes out of those guys. Obviously, they struggled shooting the ball in Game 2. But at the end of the day, the Clippers got the win, and that's obviously most important. Chris Dunn was awesome on the defensive end, forced a lot of turnovers, and made things tough on Denver. He's a dog who's always going to dive in a loose ball and play his hardest, so I do love the way he plays. We'll see how things go tonight. Obviously, a really busy night in sports. The New York Giants picking at number 3, and then obviously the LA Clippers playing in Game 3 at the Intuit Dome, the first playoff game ever in the Intuit Dome history, obviously with this year being its opening year. It'll be very, very fun to watch. I'm sure it should be a great environment. We're wishing the Clippers all the best, and hopefully things work out for the Giants with a 3rd overall pick. Wishing all of your teams the best as well. Hopefully they take the players you want. Anyways, that'll wrap up this episode. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen to this. As always, I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a good one. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you.